hello and welcome to the show. Today I want to talk to you about the old Hollywood studio system. And if you have listened to this podcast for a longer time, you heard me refer to the term old Hollywood and studio system many times already. And I had roughly outlined the system which the actresses and actors of old Hollywood had worked in. Today I want to take this episode to fill this term with a bit more life and color and to make it more understandable, if you are not like a lunatic like me who knows this. So what exactly is the studio system? It roughly refers back to the time between 1927, which marked the introduction of sound to the movies, and 1948, which marked the beginning of the demise of the system because of a Supreme Court ruling that demanded separation between production and distribution. But I will come to that later again. And it is called studio system because the film industry was controlled by a fairly low number of vertically integrated companies that had complete control of each aspect of the production. And altogether, there were 8 big studios that formed the system. And the big 5, as they are called, were the first ones. There were Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, RKO Radio Pictures. And the other 3 were Universal Pictures, Columbia Pictures, and United Artists. The other 3 means they were not as much integrated vertically. So they had, for example, not a great exhibition affiliation like with the theatre. So complete control of the production was marked by several factors. And I have put in those which I know about. So the first were long-term contracts with actors and directors. So in this system, actors, actresses, and directors, just like costume makers and screenwriters, they were all employed based on a contract with a weekly salary, which is very much the opposite of the film industry today, where it actually is all a freelance gig. And the creatives are forced to being their own brand and advocating for themselves. And they have become their own micro corporations since the mid-1950s. But when being employed, that meant that the studio decided whether or not it wanted to make the investment into a person, into what kind of movies they wanted to make in the upcoming years, whether someone took a liking to you as an actor, actress, director, and whether or not you would be groomed into an A-list star, an A-list director. And it would also mean that you were forced to take on roles that you as an actor or actress disliked. You could be cast in horrible movies with little other star potential or prospects of gaining like a huge public image boost from it. And they did so, for example, with Elizabeth Taylor, who was punished for her divorce from Conrad Hilton with a B movie, although she was already an A-list star. So that was like, they could do with you whatever they wished to, because you had the contract, you were paid for something, you had to do whatever they wanted you to do. And actors and actresses or directors could be lent to other studios for some extra cash for the studio they were employed at. So actors actually did not have much agency. But on the other hand, when they got employed, they had steady income and could rise to rank to a star, which was, like today, very much something people strived to do. So a second point of this vertical integration, this complete control, was their own studio lots and production facilities. They did not have to hunt for locations or pay rental fees, but they owned all the studio facilities to film and finish basically all the movies they could ever dream of, with all the camera and sound equipment on hand. So there were basically no extra costs in producing extra movies, and that's why the cash was constantly streaming in. I mean, they had steady contracts with actors and actresses. They had the studio lot. They had the production facilities. So like all costs were set, and they just could produce one movie after the other. And the more they produced, the more money would come in. For me, as I love the lavish clothes and the extraordinary set designs from those earlier days of Hollywood, it was also a good thing that they had their own costume departments and set design departments, which allowed for great costume designers to really make a mark on long-term actresses in developing their style. Although Adrienne Trevilla and Edith Hatt would have made their way one way or the other, I think, this environment of they being the head of how do I make this person a star What kind of clothing? How can I do this like through all the movies that he or she is making? This is just like, you couldn't do that with freelancers. This is just one point in time where this kind of image making from a style perspective was like really intrinsically tied to the movie roles that they got and to the star image the studio wanted to create. So for me, as a fashion lover and as a glamour lover and as a lover of old Hollywood, that was a good thing. And the third criteria for being vertically integrated and having complete control was distribution exhibition. So the big studios also owned the distribution systems, and the big five also the theater chains in which the movies were shown. So they did not have to rely on anybody else, like people who would say, okay, this movie is rubbish, we won't show it. No matter what they produced, they could show it. So they could get anything they wanted in front of millions of people and get the money. What are the reasons why the studio system was so immensely successful? There are different factors, and probably I leave out some, but I give you like what I know. So the first is the Great Depression. So those two coincide. Like the studio system of old Hollywood and the Great Depression, they do happen at the same time. And it was fairly cheap to see a movie. And so basically all Americans streamed to the cinemas for a couple of cents because they wanted to dream about a better life. They want to be taken to this world of make-believe, of beautiful clothes. And it was not expensive to do so. And there were more than twice as many theaters in the US than in the mid-1980s. And definitely more than today, as more and more have closed down in the process. So it was like all Americans flocked to the cinemas for distraction, for inspiration, and for, doing something. They didn't have TV sets back then. The second was the block booking system. When block booking, a studio sold a block of movies, which like on average were around 5 movies, to the theaters, their own theaters and independent theater owners. There were still some. And of those 5 movies, mostly only one was of good quality, like an A-list movie. The others were average B movies or worse. And as Life magazine wrote in 1957 about the studio system, it wasn't good entertainment and it wasn't art, and most of the movies produced had a uniform mediocrity, but they were also uniformly profitable. The $1 million mediocrity was the very backbone of Hollywood. So we produce as many movies as we can and we sell them all, and people will go see them anyways because they want to get distracted, made them millions. And it was specifically the block booking practice that was outlawed by the Supreme Court ruling in 1948, which basically was the start of the demise of the studio system. More on that later. The third reason why the studio system was so immensely successful was complete control. The studios had complete control about everything, from the movie market right down to the lives of their employees, the actors. From marriages to hairstyles, everything was decided for them. And as Hollywood biographer David Stan puts it, it's probably easiest to think of MGM as a totalitarian state. Pretend it's not a movie studio, pretend it's a country. And it was also the time in which stars were enigmas. They had secrets. Their life was not public. And this was also the time where their image was carefully created and the actors and actresses had to adhere to basically a pre-written script, like written for them by their studio, to carve a certain public image. And if they failed to live up to the expectation, they were cut off. They were like either let go from their contract or they were put into C movies. So they better behaved. So basically it was big money combined with a big illusion, and it was all sold to the public in a way that pleased them. So there were lots of things going on that benefited the system. But why and how did the studio system collapse? The collapse came with the Supreme Court ruling in 1948. And that ruling ordered divorcement between production on the one side and distribution and exhibition on the other side. But actually the ultimate kill was made by none other than Howard Hughes. Some of you might wonder, who? And those who know him will ask, what? For those of you who do not know Howard Hughes, in short, Howard Hughes was a very influential man in old Hollywood, and the movie The Aviator, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, is all about him. Howard Hughes had multiple affairs with some of the biggest female stars of Hollywood, and he made and produced movies. He is most known, though, for his aviation business, as well as his eccentric behavior in older age. Because of trauma from plane crashes, as well as neurosyphilis and allodynia, he was basically unfit for business. So, it was him who broke off the studio system, because he saw the ruling of the Supreme Court to divorce production and distribution as a chance rather than a problem, because he already had shares in RKO, one of the big five studios, but it was the financially most unstable of the five, with distribution exhibition being its very pain point. So he freely agreed to the divorcement and set up two separate companies, one for production, one for distribution and exhibition. And he set a future date by which he would sell his stakes in one of them to avoid the conflict. And this very action undermined all other studios that handed in appeals to the Supreme Court ruling that this demand of divorcement was unfeasible. So they all had to start to divorce their structures. And to Howard Hughes and RKO, it wasn't much of a deal because they didn't have many theaters anyway, so he didn't really suffer from that. Later on, RKO died because of his mismanagement and because of how he set it all up, but at that point, it was a good decision. Another reason why it collapsed, like why the studio system collapsed, was the rise of television. Because people now could watch things at home. It was not like everybody had a television set, but, they got more and more households had them. And so less was demanded from Hollywood, because the appeal of the cinema going somewhere to watch something slowly started to vanish. And Americans could watch talkies from the comfort of their own home. So there was a complete different mindset of what had to be produced in Hollywood compared to what was shown on TV. So this is basically the official end of the era. And after that, a new system took place, and basically many different systems of Hollywood took place. Maybe you didn't know that, so I will get you up to speed. The system that took place afterwards, like right after the studio system collapsed, was the star system. Meaning the industry turned into a freelance gig. Actors and actresses, directors, screenwriters and producers, as well as costume designers and set designers, they were all freelancers. And they got contracted only on a project base and not on a long-term wage basis. And at that time, it was also starting to become the norm that actors demanded not a wage, but a percentage of the revenue of the movie, which made a huge difference in their income. And the paychecks grew bigger and bigger with the growing international market and the demand for big names that would secure a box office hit. And by the end of the 1950s, more than half of all American movies were independent productions. And famous actors also set up their own production companies. And that was also the time when directors started to demand higher paychecks. Because of their draw, major talents flocked to the set, flocked to some films, and they were able to secure talent for a movie that otherwise probably would not have said yes. So they demanded more money as well. Hollywood found back to its glory in the 70s. And it was with the blockbusters Jaws in 1975 and George Lucas' Star Wars in 1977. These were the real first blockbusters in a new era of cinema and marked New Hollywood, with movies opening nationally and internationally, with trailers and huge promotional merchandising and marketing budgets, which have not been there before. This is a huge difference to what was going on before. In the 1990s, there was conglomerate Hollywood. It was taking over with 5 to 6 big corporations dominating the world market. And in the 21st century, like in the last 20 years, the big studios were focused primarily on producing mainstream, which basically opened back up opportunities for the independent filmmakers to create quality once again. But with the advent of Prime, Hulu and Netflix, the big studios face rapid and ongoing decline. They need to adapt to what is going on in the market right now. So this is just a little overview of what happened after Old Hollywood and after the big studio system that produced the Old Hollywood glamour and stars. But I want to take a second to point out some flaws of the studio system and of all the systems that I just pointed out. What all systems had in common for a very long time is the exploitation of women. Old Hollywood, though, was the biggest of all the perpetrators. The big studios had made sure that the illusion of perfection was the only thing the audiences would ever see. Talents were controlled down to the most minute detail, like eyebrow shapes, hairline, teeth, and names are just some of the examples. And actors and actresses, primarily actresses, were practically owned by the studios. And actresses were seen as goods that needed to do some favors to get a role if they did not have star status yet. And so many aspiring actresses were harassed, had to do things they didn't want to do, and many of them, who we don't know by name, probably have stopped pursuing that dream because of traumatic and traumatizing incidents in that industry. One of the most prominent examples of Old Hollywood in this scenario are the stag nights. It was a night to which men were invited, and the rule of it was whatever happens there would stay there. And actresses, and especially female extras, were invited. And those who had really good advisors and friends in Hollywood got the advice to never go to a party in Hollywood. Because showing up there, especially at such a stag night, they were harassed or even raped. Especially extras with no star contract who depended on the goodwill of directors and studio officials. They were forced to do whatever was demanded from them. And this was so far-reaching that they even had doctors who took care of the allegations, they performed abortions, and they treated sexually transmitted diseases, because this was not like a one-time thing. It was epidemic. Afterwards, when something happened, everything was hushed. Nobody said something about it, and the women were silenced. This is the sad side of Old Hollywood. Although I love the glamour, I love the stars, and I love what the output of Old Hollywood was from an artistic and film aficionados side of things. But it is a really sad side, and we all know about the Me Too movement. So we do know it was it is in the structures, and that's a sad thing. And it should not be something that we don't talk about. Everything has a light side and a shadow side, something positive, something negative. So they had the most glamorous stars, but they were also the biggest shadows. So I love Old Hollywood still. I still love the stories, but I want it to be out there. So I hope I didn't freak you out. I hope you know now what I know about the studio system. And yes, I will talk to you next week. Bye.